Hello everybody, welcome back to Vinyl Junkie Record Shop. My name is Mike, and today I'm excited to do a video that is a response video to a thread going around the vinyl community that was started by MetalMickey, and it's a really great thread. It's the 1, 2, 3 album challenge, and I've really enjoyed watching everybody's videos in response to this challenge. And basically the idea is you have to start with one album, which is your favorite album by a band or an artist. That album has to be their debut album. And then you go to another band or artist where your favorite album from them is their second album. And then another artist where your favorite album from them was their third album in their discography. So you try to go as high up the ladder as you can. And it really does get difficult to get to a higher number. But this is such a great challenge because it really allows you to dig deep into your collection and really just explore such the wide range of bands and artists that are out there creating music. And there's just so many albums and so many bands, and you have so many favorites from so many artists that as much as there is to choose from, it's challenging because, really, as bands go through their career, 1 through 5 is usually pretty easy to get through, but going from 6 and up gets challenging because most bands really put out their best work earlier on in their career, because typically when you do something so great, it's hard to match that as you continue to grow as an artist. But anyway, I'm going to try to get through these. That's Sam in the background. Go lay down, buddy. I'm working here. Go lay down. Go lay down. Go lay down. Sorry about that, guys. I've got through 16, and I'm going to let my viewers decide if they think that's legitimate. 1 through whatever, straight legit. And I'll let you guys decide whether you think I'm trying to bullshit you or not. I don't think I am, but I'll let you decide in the last couple that are on there. I hesitate. 1 through 14, really solid amount because I've got those to show you. The other 2 I don't have to show you, and that's why I'm a little iffy on it. Because, the conventional argument would be, well, if it's your favorite, why don't you have it? Well, there's a couple of explanations for that, and I'll get to it when I get there. But anyway, let's get started. For my debut, I only really had one rule, and the rule was each artist, I wanted them to have a minimum of 3 albums. I didn't want someone to have 1 album and that be their debut, or only a couple of albums. So I wanted a minimum of 3. So let's get started. And number 1, could have selected a bunch, but I wanted to go with something that I didn't think anybody else would show or had shown. So I went with this one. This is from the band Icon. This came out in 80, somewhere in the early 80s. But I could be wrong. I want to say this band was out of Denver, Colorado. But this is just an absolute killer 80s, American 80s power metal album. It had more of the power of the new wave of British heavy metal and less of the swagger and glam that would come out of the late 80s. But just such a great album. Rock On Through the Night, Killer Machine, On Your Feet, World War, Hot Desert Night, Rock and Roll Maniac. Just a fantastic album. And this is, I'm glad that I've had an OG copy of this throughout the years. But yeah, if you've never heard of Icon, jump on this. It's a fantastic album. All right. For my number 2, this is one of my very favorite albums of all time. And it was the second album from American Southern rock legends Molly Hatchet. This is Flirting with Disaster. When you're a kid, even if you don't know what the music is, you see something like that on the album cover and think that's got to be awesome. But these early Frank Franzetti. Anyway, these early Molly Hatchet album covers are legendary, but the music contained therein is just as awesome. And on their second album, I really think they hit their remarkable sound of combining what I thought was 80s hard rock and heavy metal with classic Southern rock and boogie. And we've got classics like Whiskey Man, Jukin City, Boogie No More, all the outro guitar work in Boogie No More, fantastic. Flirting with Disaster, one of my favorite songs of all time. Good Rockin', Gunsmoke, a great deep track from Molly Hatchet. Long Time. Just, again, great album. One of my favorite albums ever made. And number 3, I went with a Canadian metal band. And this is the 3rd album in their discography for Helix. This is No Rest for the Wicked. This was the first album that I ever got from Helix. I probably thought that it was an interesting album cover, and that's the reason why I picked it up. We did that back in the 80s because you didn't have Apple Music or Spotify. You couldn't listen to a band without getting their album and putting it on and deciding whether you liked it or not. But this is just a great album. Classic tracks. Does a Fool Ever Learn? I love that lead-off track to this album. Let's All Do It Tonight. Heavy Metal Love. Check Out the Love. No Rest for the Wicked. The title track is a great song. Don't Get Mad, Get Even. Dirty Dog. White Lace, Black Leather. This is just a fantastic hard rock and metal album all the way through. So that's number 3 with Helix. Number 4. I wanted to showcase this album because I feel like this is one of the more underrated thrash metal bands of the 80s. This was the 4th release from Laz Rocket. This is Annihilation Principle. Absolutely love this album. It's got great songs like Fire in the Hole, Chain of Fools, Chasing Charlie, Mob Justice, Shadow Company, had a cover of Holiday in Cambodia. This album, to me, stacks up with any of the classic thrash albums from the big name bands from that era. And I think this was really overlooked and underappreciated. And thrash metal purists all know what I'm talking about. Annihilation Principle was an absolute gem. So clearly my favorite Laz Rocket album. At number 4, Annihilation Principle. All right, number 5, I have to showcase this. This comes in. I go to this and I identify this as my favorite metal album of all time. This is the 5th studio album from Iron Maiden, and it's Power Slave. Not much to say about this other than it's absolutely fantastic. I feel like this was Iron Maiden absolutely hitting their stride. They were firing on all cylinders with this. Some heavier tunes like Aces High is almost proto thrash. 2 Minutes to Midnight, I go to that as my favorite Iron Maiden song. Lost for Words, Big Aura, great instrumental. Flash of the Blade, The Duelists. A lot of people don't like Back in the Village. I love Back in the Village. That's probably my favorite deep Iron Maiden cut. Title track, Power Slave, and then it closes out with the epic Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. Absolute powerhouse of a record, and one of my maybe my second favorite album of all time. All right, number 6. This is an album that I just absolutely loved growing up in the 80s. This wasn't my introduction to this band, and there's another couple of records of theirs that could easily be injected into someone's favorite, but this has always been my favorite from this band. I love this album, and this is Saxon's Crusader. Just absolutely love this record. Sailing to America, Just Let Me Rock, Bad Boys Like to Rock and Roll, Do It All For You, cover of Set Me Free, The Crusader, a little bit of What You Fancy, Rock City, Run for Your Lives. This is just a great, great, great album. I wore this cassette out, listened to it so much, cruising around in my car, and I would get up before I go to school in the mornings. I would put this on and listen to it to get kind of hyped up to go to school. But a lot of people kind of felt like Saxon was going in too much of a commercial direction with this album. I don't see it that way. I just think these are really great songs, and this is one of my favorite records of all time. All right, at number 7, I made a modification here. I was going to show Crocus with Headhunter because that's absolutely my favorite Crocus album, but thanks, Darcy. You kind of put that one out there also. I had to change a couple of mine because Darcy from Six Strings, Nine Lives, we had a few in common, and I kind of wanted to show some things that I didn't think anybody else would show. So I totally switched gears, and I parked the whole metal thing on the side, and I went just with music in general, and I found the 7th studio album from, I live in Indiana, so anybody from Midwestern United States knows they got to know John Cougar Mellencamp. And this is his 7th studio album, And it followed in the coattails of American Fool, which had Jack and Diane and Hurt So Good, so some really big hits for John. But this album kind of took that rocking theme, which some of his earlier stuff could kind of maybe say was reminiscent of what Bruce Springsteen was kind of doing on the East Coast, but with a little Midwestern flair. But what John did with this album was he really totally injected his own flavor in it, which was kind of a combination of Rolling Stones and Bruce Springsteen, and you get that, you kind of hear that vibe overall when you listen to the best song on this album and one of his best songs in general, Pink Houses. You get that kind of that bluesy Rolling Stonesy guitar riff. But what an absolute great song! One of the greatest rock songs ever, in my opinion. But this album really rocks from top to bottom. It starts with Crumbling Down, then you get Pink Houses, the Authority song. Play Guitar is just a great song. Who you gotta love that line. I forget all about that macho shit and learn how to play guitar. Loving Mother For You. Man, that's a great deep track. That's a great rocker. Serious Business, great rocking song. So yeah, this is my favorite Mellencamp album, and it's a great rock and roll album if you've not checked it out. Oh, just to show you I wasn't kidding. I have that out when I'm parking it. Here's Crocus. That was a number 7 also. All right, I thought this is really kind of rolling. It's not too tough. Some of these are falling right into place. At number 8, one of the first metal albums I ever really remember having, and this has just always been my favorite album from this band, hands down. This is Blackout from the Scorpions. It's just such great, memorable, classic tunes. Starting out with the title track Blackout, man. When you're like, when did this come out? 82. When you're a 12-year-old and Blackout's coming out of the speakers, it's getting into your brain. Like, man, this is great stuff. And then Can't Live Without You, that guitar riff, one of my favorite metal riffs ever. No One Like You is the big radio hit. You Give Me All I Need, Now. And then the highlight of this album, one of the highlights though, is the album, not the closer, but the penultimate. Would that be penultimate? Next to last. The track China White. Oh man, that thing is down and dirty, and that riff that guitar tone is so raw, and that's just such a great song. China White. That may be my favorite deep cut from a Scorpions album. But fantastic album. Again, one of my favorite metal albums of all time. Blackout. That's in at number 8. Number 9. Number 9 was a little tough. 9 was tough. I was gonna show Heaven and Hell. Again, thanks, Darcy. But the thing about that is, I'm not going to argue with anybody that says Heaven and Hell is their favorite Black Sabbath album. And the reason why I think I could go with it as my favorite Sabbath album is because you don't have to consider, how do I differentiate, say, if you love Sabotage or Paranoid or Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, how do you really stack those up against each other and pick one of those as one of your favorite from that era? Go, Sam. Go lay down. Go play with Jack. Heaven and Hell was kind of like a reinvention of Black Sabbath after the whole separation from Ozzy. And not only was it a great album from Sabbath, but it helped pave the way for 80s heavy metal in general. So you can very easily go with Heaven and Hell as a great album. I went the opposite. I looked through some other discographies, and I've never been a big junkie of this band, but I mean, come on, they're arguably one of the greatest and most influential rock bands ever, and that's the Beatles. And this is the White Album. The White Album was their 9th release, and this is my favorite Beatles album. If I'm going to go listen to the Beatles, this is the album I'm going to go to. It's a bit challenging because there's so much to take in if it's one of the double album, but just some really fantastic. Sam, go lay down. Some fantastic songs on this album. Back in the USSR, Dear Prudence, Glass Onion, Oobla Dee, Oobla Daw, what are some other? Rocky Raccoon, that's a great song. Blackbird, Happiness is a Warm Gun. I think Your Blues is on here. But it's also got, I mean, the one true Beatles metal song, Helter Skelter, amazing. So, yeah, I feel like this was kind of the Beatles trying to reinvent themselves after doing so many different things in the studio. Most people go to Sgt. Pepper as their favorite Beatles album. Very, very much could. But no, this is clearly my favorite Beatles album, the White Album, and it conveniently fell into the number 9 slot. All right. 10. 10's challenging for some folks. For me, pretty easy. It just so happens to be that the 10th album of this band's discography is not only my favorite album from them, but it's my favorite album of all time, and that is Styx with Paradise Theater. I have a very huge emotional attachment to this album. It's one of the first albums that I remember really going out and getting on my own. Styx was the first concert that I saw, and I saw them on this tour. So this just has always been a very important album for me, and it's got great songs on it. It's almost a greatest hits Styx album in and of itself. It's got my favorite, one of my favorite deep cuts from Styx in Lonely People. Great song. It's got some heavier moments. Rockin' the Paradise is one of their more energetic and rockin' songs. Absolutely love that. It's one of my favorite lead-off tracks of any album. And then you've got Halfpenny, Twopenny, Snowblind. That's a kind of heavier Styx moment. And then, you've got the big radio hit, Too Much Time on My Hands, which is one of the bigger songs off the album. And ironically, because it was kind of really poppy, kind of that more new wavy poppy element, it's never been one of my favorite songs from the band. But, if that is the song that's one of your least favorite of an album, then you're going to love that album. Anyway, Styx, great album, number 10. 11 was tricky. 11 was really tricky. Again, Darcy, great job, man. He went with Lick It Up by Kiss. You could easily go with that because, again, Lick It Up is kind of one of those albums that you can choose that as a favorite album because it's fantastic from start to finish. But you don't have to then sit and decide, oh man, what do I really like more? Destroyer, Love Gun, Rock and Roll Over. So you go to something like Lick It Up, which is totally different, and you can say as different as it is, it's one of my favorites because it's such a great album. But I went with this one. Again, a band that I'm not super, super, super high on. I mean, we all know who they are. We've all heard their songs throughout the years. I'm not real familiar with their earlier material, but as far as albums go, this is one of the classic albums of all time, and it was an easy pick for me that number 11 in Fleetwood Mac's discography is Rumors, and just a great album. Got some of my favorite Fleetwood Mac songs on here, and the Chain, Gold Dust Woman, those are a couple of my favorites, but just a really, really influential and killer rock album, very important rock album in the history of how things go. So that's my number 11. Number 12, I'm going to show you a couple here, and this is where it starts to get kind of iffy, and I didn't want anybody to think I was really kind of cheating. So the first one I picked was this one here. This is Hermitage by Moonspell, and this is an album that came out in 2021, and it made my top albums list of that year. I want to say it was just on the outside of, it might have been 5, 6, I don't remember. It was pretty high up there. I love this album, and this was a total surprise to me. I wasn't even going to listen to it because I've never really been a Moonspell fan. They've been around forever, and I just didn't listen to that stuff a whole lot. But man, is this album amazing! It's atmospheric, it's progressive, it's got some dark moments. It's like Pink Floyd meets black metal, or it's not really a black metal album at all. But there's some amazing guitar work on here, some really killer clean vocal work. But it's such a good record. So it happened. It was the 12th album in their discography, but I got to thinking, This is the only Moonspell album I've ever had. So is it really going to count, or is that going to be bullshit? So I started scratching my head and thinking about where else could I go, or what band could I look at and dig into their discography and get to a 12. And here it is. It's clearly my favorite Thin Lizzy album ever, is Thunder and Lightning. I love everything about this album, from the music in it to the album cover. The back, it's got this awesome photo here. Everything about this album is killer. And it came out in 80... When did it come out? 83. So this was kind of just, this was one of those albums that was kind of really influential in me expanding my sonic knowledge of hard rock and metal. The only other Lizzy album that I think, that for me at least, would compete with this as number one would be Jailbreak. But I've always identified Thunder and Lightning as my favorite Thin Lizzy album. So I can very honestly put it at number one, as a number 12 in the discography. And not only is this my favorite Lizzy album, I'd identify this as one of my favorite 80s metal albums, hard rock albums. Much like, we'll get to that later. But this one's underappreciated and underrated. And it's a stone cold classic, Thunder and Lightning at 12. All right, 13. Again, a band that's been around for a long time. I was never a huge fan of this band. I have a lot of their albums, but around album 7 or 8 for them, I kind of didn't follow them a whole lot. And then they came out with an album, their 13th album in their discography. One that I hadn't ever really intended on listening to, let alone enjoying as much as I did. But oh my goodness, this album just floored me. I loved it, and as a matter of fact, the year it came out, which I want to say was 2020. If you don't believe me, if you think I'm BSing you about this being my favorite album from this band, this is what this was my number one album of the year, and that's Korn with The Nothing. Absolutely love this album. And it was 2019. 2019 is when this came out. And because I went to see them in early 2020 in Fort Wayne, the first time I had ever seen Korn. They were touring to support this album. Amazing show. And then, like the next month after that, the whole pandemic, COVID craze thing hit, and the world shut down. And that was the last concert that I saw for a long time. But man, this album was just totally amazing. The thing I liked about this album was Korn was a band that I had lost a lot of interest in, and when I heard this, they really weren't doing anything to reinvent the wheel or reinvent their sound. But what I think this album did was it took everything about what they had done, which was very original at the time when they emerged in the scene, and they just put out an album that made you understand how good they were at what they did, and that's what this album did. The vocals are standard, what you'd expect from Korn. The dual guitar work, the big chunky bass, bottom-ended riffs. This album's very jarring. It's emotional. It's heavy. There's just a lot of things to love on it. And this is how can an album like that not be one of your favorites in the band's catalog? So yeah, the 13th studio album from Korn, my favorite Korn album, The Nothing. We're getting to 14. Wow, 14. Whew. Anybody else get this high? I thought this one was going to be tough, but I identified this album rather quickly. Again, it's one that could be debatable, but I've kind of set the stage for it. It's not debatable for me. It's my favorite album from the band. There are others that you could choose on any other given day when you're kind of ranking their discographies, but this is one of those bands that's been around forever. They're still around today. They're into they've probably got 20 plus, 25 plus albums in their discography. And again, it kind of depends upon when you are introduced to a band as to what your favorite album from them is going to be. And for me, I can say with full anyway, I'm not finding the word that I want, but I can say, in all honesty, this is my favorite Uriah Heep album. This is Abominog. It's their 14th studio album. You can kind of maybe make it out. I absolutely love this album. You know, there may have been a time where the only other Uriah Heep album that could possibly compete with this at the top would be from the classic lineup, and that would be Demons and Wizards. A lot of people pick that as their favorite Heep album because it was so influential. But other classic Heep albums, they're so great, and they got such a great discography. But this is, again, it's one of those moments in their career where you're like, well, it's very different. It's not, you know, you've only got Mick Box and Lee Kerslake from the original lineup. David Byron's gone. Ken Hensley doesn't appear on this album. But what do? They recruit Bob Daisley to play bass. They bring in this guy, Peter Golby, who's got a great voice. I've heard him described as maybe a cross between Lou Gramm and Ronnie James Dio, and that's a fair assessment of his range. But this album, Uriah Heep found themselves trying to be relevant in the early 80s in that explosion of the new emerging metal scene in the United States. It was kind of born and bred from the new wave of British heavy metal, and that's what they did. They took those elements of the new album and injected it into their classic style, and you get some absolute killer songs on this. Too Scared to Run, On the Rebound, Chasing Shadows, Prisoner. One of my very favorite Uriah Heep songs ever, and one of my favorite metal songs ever, is Sell Your Soul. Oh, what a great song that is, man. That's the Way That It Is, Think It Over, Hot Persuasion, Running All Night with a Lion. This is an absolute stone cold killer album, and in all of the Uriah Heep catalog, this one is probably the one that's found the most time playing in my car, jamming in my head. I love it from top to bottom. It's an absolute amazing album. So Uriah Heep with their 14th studio album, my favorite Uriah Heep album, Abominog. Okay, so I feel like at 14, we get to 14, and I'm real confident in that list. I know it's easy to say, you're just picking something that fits in there. And I'm going to let my viewers, or whoever watches this video, kind of decide for themselves whether they think that 15 and 16 are going to be legit. I didn't think I could get a 15. I racked my brain and thought, how can I do this? How can I do this? First of all, there are so few artists that really have discographies that get that high. And I thought, well, I'm done. And then last night I was looking through my collection and looking at some different artists and thought, who's got an album that's that late in their discography that I could maybe identify as a favorite? And then it hit me, and I went to this guy's discography and I looked through it, and I found at number 15, released in May of 1988, an album that I had owned on cassette. For the life of me, I can't find it. I don't know where it's at. I don't know if it survived. I have been wanting this album on vinyl for a long time, and it's on my grail list. I could probably just order it on eBay, but there's no fun in that. But, kind of set the stage. Albums that are important to you, your favorite albums are those that have an impact on your life. So in May of 1988, I would have just graduated from high school, or about to graduate from high school. So you've got all those roller coaster emotions of the highs and lows of that. Young love, young heartbreak, the weight of what am I going to do now, the weight of being out of high school off your shoulders. But then the pressure of, okay, that's over. Now what do I do? Do I go to college? Do I work? What's going to go next in my life? And the albums that come out in those times are the ones that really resonate with you and you hold on to. And as it turns out, this 15th studio album from this guy was one that I played the absolute, I played it to probably didn't play anymore on the cassette. Listened to this thing in my car so many times, and so many of these songs resonated with me and were important to me. And that was Rod Stewart with Out of Order. Let me take a drink here. And again, I wish I had a copy of it to show you guys. But I think I could very confidently, if I were to rank a Rod Stewart discography, which is not one that I think about really doing because he's had a lot of great albums. And I'll let you guys decide whether you think this is BS or not, because I've never really sat down and thought about, all right, what's my favorite Rod Stewart album? If I had to just pick one off the cuff, I might go with Every Picture Tells a Story, released in 1971. I was 1 year old at the time. I didn't know that until I was older and could really understand and have a bigger appreciation of music. So a lot of the great Rod Stewart songs and albums were ones that really came out before I was able to do that. So I was a big Rod Stewart fan after the fact, per se. So this is one of those albums that I could look at in a list of discographies and go, oh, wow, yeah, this is one of my favorites. It could be my very favorite. And I'd have no problem putting this at the top of a Rod Stewart list. It's got songs like Lost in You, Lethal Dose of Love, Forever Young. Everybody knows those. My Heart Can't Tell You No. Dynamite was a great rocker. Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out. It's kind of funky. Crazy About Her. Try Little Tenderness is a great soul ballad. And then Almost Illegal is the rocker that ended this set. And another great... It's going to drive everybody nuts. I'm going to shut this door. He's barking at the UPS man. Sorry about that, guys. But another thing about this album is that Rod's always associated himself with great musicians over the years, especially guitar slingers. And in this particular album, he teamed up with Andy Taylor, who I think is an underappreciated axe slinger in his own right. You may know him from Duran Duran. Duran Duran was not one of my favorite bands, but Rio was a very interesting album, and his guitar work on that was one of the highlights of that album. The guy can flat out rock, and when he left Duran Duran, he had kind of a phase in that mid to late 80s where he did a lot of work. He worked with Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols on a couple of things. And he was in the Power Station with Robert Palmer, and I think it was another guy, maybe the other Taylor from Duran Duran. But anyway, Andy Taylor, great guitar player. So his talent is all sprinkled all over this album, not only with his playing, but a lot of writing credits. So it's a great album. I'd never forgotten about it, but I hadn't listened to it in such a long time. And then when this occurred to me, or I found this, looking into trying to find a 15, man, I loved this album when I had it back in the day. It's got a great album cover. The logo on how Rod's name appears on it are all like a huge memory that came flooding back, and I would have no problem. I would have no problem doing a Rod Stewart discography and saying, hey, my favorite Rod Stewart album is Out of Order from 1988. So I'll let you guys decide if you believe me on that. But I'm throwing it out there. And then if I wanted to find a 16 again, I don't have it yet. I'm going to get it here at the end of the year. I just haven't purchased it yet because it's too expensive, or it's really expensive. But this just happens to be the newest, and it's the 16th album in this band's discography. But it's Norwegian progressive black metal band Enslaved with Heimdall. Oh man, is this album absolutely amazing! It's one of the albums that along with another album of that kind of sound, Insomnium with is it 1619? Anyway, it's a year. But this Enslaved Insomnium albums are two that I've kind of go back to over and over again throughout this year as maybe being one of these possibly being the year's best album. But this Enslaved album is absolutely killer. It's got great melodic moments, great dark brooding moments. If you're into that classic black metal sound, there's enough of that sprinkled in here to keep you interested. But there's also like elements of 70s prog. There's even moments on it that almost sound like it could be like jazz sounding, like it's not jazz instruments, it's you know, it's keyboards, but it almost sounds like this could be like you know, on a jazz album. And I think everything Enslaved has done in the last several years has been really good, but I could pinpoint this one as my favorite of their catalog because it just stands out. The songs are more memorable. And that's one of my problems with a lot of this black metal stuff, is it all kind of flows together and sounds the same, and you have a hard time remembering different tracks. But yeah, I will probably do a video on it when I get it. It's going to appear. You guys will see it at some point. But yeah, absolute killer album, Enslaved, Heimdall. If you're kind of wanting to dip your toes into the whole Norwegian black metal kind of thing, and it's evolved a whole lot since its inception. That's why those earlier albums aren't ones that I really go to. But amazing band, amazing album, and it, like I said, it happens to be their 16th. So I'm going to throw that out there. I've got 14 to show. I've got a couple more. You can decide on your own whether you believe me or not. But I was so happy to get as high as I did at you know, at 14 and reach to try to get to 16. I wanted to get Heimdall in there. I wanted to get that one in there, and 15 was really racking my brain. And if anything, just listening to Out of Order again, bringing back so many memories. Great album. I'm glad I found. I'm glad that I thought about it hard enough to find it. So that's what I love about this challenge. It really gets you to think about the albums in your collection. And there's so many artists, so many bands. You know, there are so many #1 albums you could pick. There were so many at #2. There's so many albums I really wanted to show and had to decide, no, I want to go with something different. And some of my favorite bands made appearances. Some of them didn't. And that's the way it is. There's so much to choose from. So I've had a great time putting this one together and thinking about it, talking about it. I've really enjoyed watching everybody else's. So if you stuck around this long, thanks. I appreciate it. If you're new to my channel, hit the like. If you liked what you saw, subscribe. Slowly climbing up there. I might get to 300 if I, probably not by anytime soon. 1,000 is probably a pipe dream, but you know, hey, give me a like, give me a subscribe. Can't hurt anything, right? And I thank you for joining me here in the shop. And let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know what some of your albums, some of your lists are, and we can all keep this thread going. It's a fantastic thread. It's a great idea. Thanks, MetalMickey, for coming up with such a great idea. And I look forward to talking to all you guys later. All right, thanks.